This is a video about trauma and spirituality. Good evening, this is Chris speaking. Wake up with another video on awakening, enlightenment, spirituality, this time trauma. I owe one of you a video about trauma, which is one of the most difficult topics, so I had to wait a while for the right inspiration. There are several aspects of trauma. The first is that we're all traumatized. It doesn't matter if you had a really tough trauma, like war trauma, a catastrophe, rape, childhood abuse, or not, in that regard, because we're all traumatized, some more, some less. But everyone's childhood was traumatic. Even if our parents did all they could, even if they were really good parents. Because childhood is always a loss of intuition in favor of brainwashing and enculturalization. We are taught not to listen to our inner voice, but instead to listen to external rules and laws. This is traumatic. It has to be. So this is the first thing. We're all traumatized, and not only that, we're all multiply traumatized. The second aspect is trauma, catastrophe, crisis. Like now, for example, is always a chance to see that this is not all there is, that there's some kind of illusion involved. Any crisis can be a wake-up call. It is even often like that people who are or were traumatized to a larger degree are the very ones, who enter the spiritual path and look for some higher truth. They want to look behind the scenes, behind the curtains, behind or below the stage. They really want to know what the heck is going on here. And that is the entry gate to spirituality. So your largest obstacle can be the door to freedom that others don't even look for. The third aspect is that there are no victims and no perpetrators. It's one thing. We are all one thing. And most people are stuck in a victim habit, in a victim role. And you have to get out of it. Otherwise, you will always send out victim vibes and continue to be a victim and continue to be victimized. Or else to be in danger of being codependent or having some kind of addiction or being a workaholic and so on. These are all possible side effects of not coming out of your victim role. And now the fourth and most difficult aspect is what to do if you've been subject to one of the most horrible traumas. And one of the most horrible traumas is some kind of abuse as a child, because as a child you don't have reason to help you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sexual abuse, it can be any other kind of abuse too. You can have a narcissistic parent, for example, or even a parent, a normal parent, a very good parent who died very early. And in the worst case scenario, a psychopathic parent. They're not very common, but they're not so rare either. It's about between 1 in 100 and 1 in 200, because not every psychopath is having children of his or her own. Or equally, maybe even more horrible, you get recruited as a child soldier. Maybe in a gang or in some kind of country that is in the state of war in Africa or in the Middle East. So if you're a child soldier, a child gangster, then the level of brainwashing, of course, is even more intense. And if you lose your parents very early, you have to grow up too quickly and cannot really process your pain and grief. And if your parents, or one of the parents, was a psychopath, then it's very difficult to develop any kind of trust later. The first step, of course, if something like that happened to you, is you have to acknowledge it. You cannot ignore it or sweep it under the rug. And I've discussed it many times recently with some of you. If you have to deal with your demons first, in order to let enlightening happen to you, or you have to allow enlightening happen to you first, and then your trauma will dissolve. Those are two different theories, and I think both of them are possible because many different paths are open. But more often, you have to deal with your demons first, with all the fears and your horror. Some good trauma therapy, of course, you have to find a therapist who also has some kind of a understanding of spirituality, because a lot of psychologists don't. Partly because many psychologists think that spirituality is some kind of escapism, which is often true, but not always. But this is also something you can check for yourself. If you're seeking enlightenment to get rid of something, or to be free of something, or to escape from something, tricky thing. Better to deal with your fears first. And the way to deal with them is to feel them. That is also something that is often not so much used by psychologists because they are afraid of causing a re-traumatization. But you're traumatized anyway. The trauma is there all the time. So what's there to be re-traumatized? Re-traumatization only happens when a trauma gets dragged up artificially. So this is of course not the way. But if it comes up, then you have to look at it and really feel it and acknowledge it. When it comes up by itself. And it will come up for sure at some point. And then it's important not to push it back again, not to suppress it or supplant it, but really go into it. Go into the sensation, which is easier if someone is there to provide some kind of safety frame. But I know people who can do this by themselves also, depending on your path. A really big help next to psychology can be homeopathy. This is something that can tune down the intensity, the unbearable intensity of the trauma, and enable you to deal with it without suppressing it. One of the most horrible results of being extremely traumatized is the wish for death. Can lead to some kind of slow suicide, unconsciously. Some people are longing for death, to be free at last. But there's another way. There's another way, but death. And this other way is surrender. Surrender to the fact that this horrible thing has happened to you. That in this life you got the heaviest of burdens. Because you did. And it wasn't fair. So why not acknowledge it? But acknowledging and recognizing it will not drive you deeper into victimhood and into trauma. It will free you. Because you're not trying to talk it away anymore. Or to ignore it anymore. You got seriously screwed in this life. Okay, acknowledge it. You're carrying it around with you anyway. And indirectly it will manifest as an addiction or as a disease or as anger or grief or whatever. But the real pain is to ignore it and not to feel it. To keep that part in you who feels this terrible suffering and pain imprisoned forever because you're too afraid to look at it. It's one of the most courageous and hardest things to look at this very old pain. But it is also one of the most courageous and hardest things to see that you are not, or at least not only your personality, and not only your body. You are also your mind and your emotions and your body, but not only. There is more. But to realize that up till now you have identified yourself only with your thoughts and feelings and body, and that you have allowed your brainwashing and your programs, your fear for survival, to run your life. That is equally hard and equally horrible. Any war, any catastrophe, any trauma can be a catalyst to wake up. And any stage of awakening and enlightenment can lead to letting go of these old traumas. But only by acknowledging them without pointing to a culprit. Without going into this victim-perpetrator duality. Your mind has been messed with anyway, more or less. With a very, very deep and horrible trauma, with some not so deep and horrible trauma. But it has been messed with. Anyhow. And going into this is what I have called coral in previous videos. You will only emerge at the other side of coral, at this process of cleansing, when you have looked at all your traumas. And afterwards, you're free or freer. And unfortunately, there's no easy way out. It doesn't get better by looking away. And this hurt, this minority complex that is usually caused by a trauma, can also swing into the other direction and cause megalomania. And all those so-called ego traps on the path are really unsolved traumas. Some of them will dissolve by themselves when you're ready, and some of them you have to do some kind of active effort. But the beautiful thing is that there is a way out. There is surrender. Surrender to the higher will. Even if you hate the universe and if you hate God or whatever you call it, or him or her, that this happened to you. That it was allowed that this could happen to you. Still acknowledging it and surrendering to the higher will of the universe is the only way out. Or at least the fastest way out. And there will be a lot of anger, a lot of wrath coming up. And it should come up. Why not? You've suppressed it for a long time and covered it up by helplessness or by disease. But it doesn't mean you have to take revenge. Revenge doesn't help. Revenge doesn't help. Ignoring doesn't help. Suppressing doesn't help. Escaping doesn't help. You carrying it around with you. It's in you and you have to look inside. Inside of you there are aspects that you have cut off from yourself and you have to reunite with them. But first you have to connect with them. And it will be painful, but not more painful than what it's doing to your life anyway. And the silver lining of the whole thing is that it has probably pushed you into the direction of the spiritual path. So you may have to go through hell, but you may also arrive in heaven. And I'm not talking about other places. I'm talking about this life. Heaven and hell is both in this life. Right where you are, here and now. And you will probably not be able to resolve all this on one go. It might take you several attempts and several years. But it has to be done because otherwise your states of consciousness will not be stable. It's easy to feel enlightened in your head, but it's more difficult to keep it up on a day-to-day basis in communication with others. And this is only possible if you have faced your 7 demons, 7 devils. And once you get through this, all fear will be gone. Because that's the basis of it all. The basis is fear. At some point something happened to you that was too scary for you. Too horrible. Too much fear at once. So you packed some of that fear away to be resolved later. And now it's time to resolve it. You've been carrying it around with you up till now for years or decades. And now you have the chance to let it go. And to let it go, you have to first look at it. And as I said, some people can do it by themselves in a hut in the forest or in a cave in the mountains, and some people need some help. Why not? I can say for myself that I had a lot of help and I'm very grateful for it. And I don't know how long it would have taken to resolve my issues without that support. But now that I did, I can support others if they want to, if they ask me for it. I don't have a helper complex. I don't go around persuading people that they need my help. And I don't feel the need to help others. But if someone wants support, I can give it because I have gone through it myself. And it doesn't have to be the same trauma. It just has to be, once you resolved your issues, you can be of real assistance to others, no matter what their issues are. And once also you have resolved most of your issues, it's much more easy to listen to this inner voice that tells you what is your path. Because you're not distracted all the time anymore by these negative emotions like grief and anger. And the greatest thing is that the fear is gone. It can really go away totally. I recently talked to an artist and he told me that when he went to art school, he had a painting teacher. And he said the first 5,000 paintings are horrible. Until you really are a good painter and found your own style, you need to do 5,000 paintings. And you will make mistakes. That's part of the process. You have to make mistakes so that you can learn from them. So it is best to get these 5,000 paintings behind you as quickly as possible. Because you have to do it anyway. No matter if you do it in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years. The first 5,000 tries are not it. And this is very similar. We're like artists trying to learn how to paint, or like children who are trying to learn how to walk. Imagine a small child who says after 10 tries of trying to walk and falling down again and again, okay, that's it, I give up. I will not try to walk anymore. It's too difficult. Obviously, human beings are not meant to walk. No, that's nonsense. It's just you have to do it again and again and again, and suddenly that's it. It's over. And you can wait and not do it and being afraid of doing it, or you can do it and take into account that it will take a few times until you get it right. And not give up, but surrender. There's a big difference between surrender and giving up. Okay, that's it for today. Trauma video number 1. A big thank you to all my patrons. Thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing the videos with your friends, and see you soon.